the first chapter, you talk about the city of Alexandria, and I think anyone who knows the city of Alexandria would know that it's very much known for the library that it had in the past. Anyone who loves to read knows about the Library of Alexandria. Can you just talk about how they were able to collect that many manuscripts, books, and how it became that center of scholarly discovery and scientific discovery during that time?
Yeah, sure. So Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great. He loved to found cities named after himself. And when he died, one of his lands were divided between his generals, I think 3 of them. And Egypt was taken over by the Ptolemy family. And they were Macedonians. So they weren't even proper Greeks, as it were. They were sort of slightly upstarts, and they definitely weren't kings. So it was very, very important for them to establish their dynasty. And you see this again and again throughout history. People gain power by whatever means, and they then have to make everyone believe that they actually deserve that power. And the Ptolemaic project was very much about culture. They saw Athens, which was at that time the center of the intellectual world, and they wanted to emulate it, and they wanted to use intellectual culture as a means of establishing their own power and prestige, which is, maybe, I mean, you could say possibly that the aims of that are not very good, but actually the side effect is amazing. So they pursued this really aggressive policy of obtaining texts, and to give one example that's quite famous, that they founded the library, and then any ship passing through Alexandria, and obviously Alexandria was this incredibly important port and center of trade, they would just search it, and if they found any books on the ship, they would just take them, put them in the library. And they even had I think they had a shelf mark which was from the ships, so it showed that these were all books which had basically been stolen. They also borrowed texts from Athens, sort of original copies of, I think, mainly ancient Greek literary texts. And they were supposed to return them, but they didn't. They kept them and sent money back in return. So there was a very acquisitive, aggressive policy of founding this library. And of course, they then provided huge sources of funding, and they made this place where, as a scholar, there was literally nowhere better that you could be, living in this incredible the museum, as it was called, where you were looked after, you could study, there were other scholars, there was this incredible library. So they just very cleverly made it the most attractive place in the Mediterranean world if you were interested in anything academic or literary. It's brilliant. For anyone who loves to read,
I mean, imagine going to somewhere like that and having that and access to that many books. At that time, it must have been an amazing, to me, it's an amazing achievement they were able to do it. I mean, the nature in which they were to accumulate it, maybe put that to the side. But yeah. I mean, the fact that they were able to do it and it became that place is somewhat amazing. Was it the first of its type that was able to do something like that?
Well, obviously, I mean, there were other places around. There were, medical schools. There was Athens, which had, the academy and Plato and Aristotle. But I think Alexandria kind of, it stands alone, and it has haunted the dreams of scholars and academics ever since. I mean, it doesn't go away. It's just as powerful today as it ever has been. I think the idea of a library where you can study anything. I mean, there was great libraries in Pergamon and also in Ephesus that were founded sort of around the same kind of time, but Alexandria has a special place. And also the thing I think that it sometimes gets forgotten is this: it was over a huge period of time. It was founded in, I don't know, 300, 400 BC, and it was still, a great and important centre 600 years later. So it's when we think about it, sometimes you sort of think about it was at one moment or one century, but it wasn't. It lasted for a really, really long time.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you look back at history, you think at one point in time, you think they just accumulated it in, let's say, like 5 or 10 years. But like you said,
Yeah.
it's been accumulated over centuries. So it's quite amazing to think about. And for anyone reading it, and probably for many historians, you probably wonder what would happen if that knowledge remained, and
Yeah.
what would happen if that knowledge wasn't burnt. Or, I mean, can you just talk about how the library sort of dissipated, and what happened with all that information?
Yes. So the whole idea of losing knowledge, I think, is an extremely powerful one. And there was sort of moments in history when people thought, that the library was destroyed at a certain moment, but that's just not true at all. There were moments. Julius Caesar set fire to one of the warehouses when he came to attack the city, and there were, and obviously
That was by accident, though, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was, of course, the famous moment when the Christians and the pagans were fighting for control of the city in Hypatia and all that. But that was quite a lot later. But I think the truth is that most of the knowledge that was just lost through neglect. It was all written on papyrus scrolls, which are not nearly so long living as sort of parchment, and they're fragile. And if you leave them and you don't recopy them, the ink fades, they turn to dust. And I think that probably most of the loss was just through neglect and age, and rather than some big dramatic event.
Thank you for watching this video. To listen to the full podcast, click the link in the description below.